YouTube, it's me. I'm back. I've not got much battery. I think I've got enough to do the video. I hope you're well. This is gonna be just an off-the-cuff video again. I'm gonna try and explain to you where we're at in our creation myth and its importance. I'm going to be doing another edited video, a well-edited video, to move the story further from our creation myth. Although I do have to touch upon where we're at, so that's to come over the next week or so. I'm going to be doing that, hopefully. So we left it on Plato's Academy yesterday. Just to clarify, these videos are about geometry, and especially about what I've been calling, and what is called, the canon of proportion, right? And we're discussing geometry and the duedecimal system, the dodecad system of numbers and geometry. We commonly use what is called a decimal system, 1 to 12. Not 1 to 12, decimal system 1 to 10. Now that is a useful system to use, although geometrically it isn't such a good number to use. This is why the duodecimal system and geometry is number 12 is referred to as the master number. So look, I'm doing a series of videos. I'm going to continue to talk about the numbers 1 to 12 and their significance to do with geometry. So yeah, circles within circles. It's a fact, right, that 6 circles of the same size pack around a central 7th circle, right? So we're talking about proportions and measurements and the basic shapes that correspond to our numbers 1 to 12 in our canon of proportion. So there's loads of interesting curiosities to do with this subject. Now you will notice the central circle here, and then its relationship to hexagonal, which is number 6, hexagonal geometry. 6 spheres, or six circles, right? We're talking about plane geometry in the 2 dimension. So, but a curiosity is that 6 circles of equal sizes will pack around perfectly around a central 7th. That is hexagonal geometry. And then, so we got the inner circle, then a ring of 6 circles. And then if you count a third ring, 12 circles pack around precisely around the 2 inner circles of 6 and 1, right? So here is a relationship between circles, the proportions, and hexagonal geometry. 6 ties into our duodecimal system. The numbers 1 to 6 are the building blocks, if you like, or the most important proportions and ratios in our geometry, So I wanted to touch upon that. 12 fruits of the tree of life, right? The number 12 is pivotal, like I keep saying, right? 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 months of the year, 12 signs of the zodiac, Jesus and the 12 disciples, the 12 fruits from the tree of life. I'll tell you an interesting thing about geometry. All fruiting trees display in their flowers and in their fruits pentagonal, which is number 5, right? Five relates to the pentagon. Five. So all fruiting trees, and I think it's all of them, right? So if anyone can prove me wrong on this, I'd be happy to hear about that. All fruiting trees display pentagonal five-fold geometry in their flowers and in their fruits. So this pentagonal square root 5 ratio, and its derivative, the golden cut, the golden ratio, right? So I wanted to touch on that point today, with our tree, our universal, well, pole, if you like, right? We've discussed that in the geometry creation myth, the first shape the creator makes is a circle. And that the number that corresponds to that circle is number 1. It's the first stage in the creation. It's a sphere. A circle is a two-dimensional representation of a sphere, but we're on about plane geometry. So a circle represents the universe. We're talking about a cosmology, right? The center of that circle is our universal pole. And our first proportion in our creation myth, like I've repeated many times now, the number 1 is associated and is the number of a circle. It's whole, it's complete, it's perfect, it's 1. It represents everything, right? Have I made my point? Let's move on. Hopefully it'll come back to me. So this is the curiosity of 12 in the 3 dimension. I just talked to you about the plane geometry of 1 circle surrounded by 6 and then surrounded by 12. In the 3rd dimension, Euclidean sense geometry, 3-dimensional, 6 spheres will pack tightly around a central sphere. And let me repeat that. 12 spheres, right? 12 spheres will pack tightly around a central sphere, making 13, right? Did I say that right? 12 spheres will pack around a central 13th. So that's an interesting point. Just make a future reference of this, right? I've mentioned this a few times. We're talking about the development of plane geometry and then its relationship and unfold its development into 3-dimensional Euclidean geometry. And this is why the ratios and numbers 1 to 12 are important. Number 12 being the master number. Its partner, if you like, number 12, is 7, right? Or it's an opposite. So I've mentioned before, number 7 represents the mysteries. It represents the feminine aspect of creation, of our creation. Numbers do have we're talking about that numbers can be positive and negative, right? And there are some sexual references in numbers, right? I don't want to get too mystical with that now, so we'll move on. Here again is a diagram, right? So on the two-dimensional, on the plane, there's a central circle surrounded by 6 tightly packed circles. And then the third circle is 12, right? And it's a geometrical curiosity, right? I'm not sure of the geometrical shape that is highlighted here in red, but it is relevant, right? We have it consists of equilateral triangles and squares, right? So we've already been through the proportions and ratios that correspond to the square and to the triangle, right? Square root 2 ratio, right, is relevant to the square, and the square root 3 ratio is relevant to the equilateral triangle. Is this relevant? This is relevant to something I want to discuss, but it's about the 7 sages, right? But we'll move on for now. This is what I wanted to get to, right? So this is a drawing of it's a cosmological drawing, right? From Aristotle's, from the Aristotle school and Greek traditions, right? I forgot what the term of it. Circles within circles, right? This is my point about, there's a really interesting point to gain about circles within circles, right? And I don't want to sound too mystical, but going back to what we've just discussed, with a central circle surrounded by 6 circles and then surrounded by 12. What we're talking about are patterns, right? Patterns we can see in the early stages in relationships of geometry. We're talking about the basic polygons, right? So the circle it's not a polygon, but numerically, the number 1 in our duodecimal system, the circle is the shape of corresponds to number 1, right? So 1 and 2 are abstract principles, right? There is no shape really that corresponds to number 2. You can either split a whole thing in half and call that 2 pieces, or you can have 2 circles, 1 and 2. And this is why 1 and 2 are abstract principles, right? In a geometrical sense, because the circle is complete. It represents everything, right? So we've been through as well. You might want to check out a previous video if you've not, if you're new to this, where we discuss what is created by the combining 2 circles, the Vesica Pisces, in our creation myth. You're able to develop the basic polygons from the Vesica Pisces shape, right? Or Vesica Pisces is union of 2 circles. Inside that Vesica Pisces is a fish-like shape, right? So the first shape that's made with the marriage of the 2 circles is a rhombus, which is 2 equilateral triangles back to back. So I know I'm not going to really get to a major revelation. Well, I might not, we might not get to a big point in this video. But I'm just, repeating myself. And I know I'm doing that, but there's a good reason for that. We'll get there. Just a bit more about this. This is Aristotle's cosmology. It represents the solar system or the universe as perceived 2,500 years ago, right? It was what they understood through observations, right? The Greeks observed through their astronomy observations and developed a cosmology. This is why number 12 is so important, right? Because number 12 represents zodiac, the heavens, in our creation myth, right? The heavens were observed, and this is why number 12 is pivotal in our calendar, right? this system of geometry literally means earth measure, but there's a macro element to this, and that's the cosmos, right? The creation. But then you can go to the micro world of down into the basic polygons, and so there are two ways you can come into this subject, right? But there are correspondences, and this is the point. There are correspondences that are very, very interesting to do with our basic numbers 1 to 12, the proportions and ratios, and the development of a cosmology. You will notice the similarities here to the videos I have been doing about the creation myth, right? So I'm not, for the sake of like viewers who've already been through this, I'm not going to repeat myself. You're going to have to go back a few videos, which, and that video is called the geometry creation myth. So let me pause this a minute. Right, so this is where we're at in our creation myth, right? We've drawn a circle. That's the first stage of our creation. And the ratio, proportion that corresponds to our circle is pi, right? Pi is the relationship between the width of a circle and its circumference. The second stage in the creation myth, in our Genesis, is, we have our circle, our universe, it's complete. The number 1 corresponds to that. But we want to bring order, right? So we introduce a square. I'm just going to skip over this fairly quickly. But please, if you're a bit confused at this point, like I say, go back a few videos, check out the geometry creation myth. This is what I'm referencing, yeah? And we're going to be moving that creation myth forward in future videos, so it's very important, right? To bring order to our universe, the creator introduces 2 axes, right? 2 axes, lines. Those lines then you define our square within the circle, right? So there's a direct correspondence between the proportion and size of our outer circle and then the square contained within that first big circle. That's our second ratio there, and our second shape in our creation myth, a circle and a square, right? So pi is the first ratio, proportion corresponding to the circle. The square and the square root 2 ratio corresponds to the shape of the square. The number that corresponds to the square is number 4, right? And then in our creation myth, because the Vesica Pisces produces in its fish-like womb center, it produces 2 equilateral triangles. And that's why we're introducing the equilateral triangles into our creation here, our creation. So, just to clarify, the proportions and sizes of the circle, square, and the 2 equilateral triangles, right? They represent our first 3 stages and our first 3 proportions. So that's the point I wanted to make. I was going to try and say something clever. Let me pause it and see if I can think of something. I think this is the best way to end this video. This will tie in to the video in my channel called The Geometry Creation Myth. First stage in our creation is a dot, right? Then we draw a circle, right? So first we have first we have a dot. That's our universal pole. Then we can create a circle. Then we introduce 2 axes, as you can see here. And there's our square root 2 proportion that corresponds to the square, right? Then we develop our creation, and the creator, in our creator myth, brings order. The square is about bringing order symbolically, right? Standing for square. The square root 2 ratio is often used by architects. I won't prattle on too much about that. So then we've got our third stage of our creation. We have a central circle, right? And then there's an outer ring, and then there's an inner ring, and then an outside ring. We have 3 circles, right? So the proportions and relationships correspond to each other, right? And this is what we're trying to really to get our heads around, right? Some people don't struggle with this subject, and the reason I've spent time doing this is because I really want to make these points so you can start getting it right about the proportions of these shapes. This is a cosmology. Science is a cosmology, and religions are cosmologies. Number 12 is the master number, but the hexagonal geometry is very important, right? And this is why the number 12 is so important with geometry, and number 10 isn't, right? I hope that gives you something for today. Have a great day. Have a powerful one. I'll see you on the other side.